Greetings and welcome to the Progressive Christians podcast. We are the love your neighbor kind of Christians and not the storm the Capitol kind. So if you're curious about what a socially and politically progressive Christianity looks like, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter, and I'm your host. I am a professor of theology at Methodist Theological School in Ohio, and I'm the lead pastor of the Loft Faith community at Westwood United Methodist Church in Los Angeles, California. If you like the show, we want to invite you to please rate, review, all that good stuff. Definitely subscribe to us on our YouTube channel if you haven't done so. We're going to be talking about that today. I am joined by the full crew, the OG crew. Everybody is back. Wesley,
Absolutely.
Blair, and Julia. How are y'all doing?
Buongiorno.
Welcome back, Julia.
I did love listening to Everest last week, though, too.
Oh my God, they're so great.
They were great.
You guys did great episodes while I was gone. I listened.
Well, I wanted to say, we had somebody on the ground in Italy doing Pope Watch. We had instant reaction in the text thread about what was happening on the streets. So how was your trip?
Italy is Italy is heaven. Wow, yeah. What a way to live.
Italy is heaven. Okay.
Italy is heaven.
I mean that part of Italy is just beautiful. You know, in the Tuscany.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Tuscany, so we was in Florence for like 5 or 6 days, and then the countryside. And also it's this reminder. Florence in general is this reminder that rich people could be doing so many other things with their money. Like the entire city.
Say more.
Yeah. I'm curious.
The entire city was built by the Medicis, right? And
the Medicis,
they were middle class people. They were bankers. They weren't like the aristocracy. And they used all of their money to fund science and the arts. They literally paid for the Renaissance. They paid for it.
Pay for it, extorted it. I mean, it's very complicated, but you know, they were involved in the financing of the Renaissance.
They financed the Renaissance, but as a result, you have these things like I was most moved by Michelangelo's unfinished sculptures, and like the idea that they all exist inside the stone. He's not creating them; he was discovering them. Come on, who's not moved by that?
Yeah.
And then beautiful. David, just like the finest man you've ever seen, 1,000 feet tall. Come on.
Did you see the leaf that they have behind it? You know how they used to have the leaf that they would put out and cover it up? Did they show you that at all?
No.
Yeah, so there was this, time obviously after the Renaissance where they kind of reverted back to a little bit more of a
Puritan,
kind of framework. Yeah, and so there's this hole in him where you can actually attach a leaf to cover up his penis because they just, I don't know if that's a word I can say on here, right? That's not gonna get bleeped out. I don't know. That shouldn't be.
It's just anatomy.
I know. I'm like, oh shoot, can I say that word?
I think our listeners are the kind of people that use anatomical language for body parts with their children, or at least I hope so. And maybe we should have an episode about that.
Yeah, that's fair. I hope so too. Blair, I know you were busy out doing other stuff, so we're glad to have you back as well.
Hey, can I share that I am now also a professor?
Yes, you can.
Absolutely.
I am starting this week with Claremont School of Theology, which is housed at Westwood United Methodist Church, a United Methodist seminary and interfaith seminary, and I'm going to be assistant dean of co-curricular development and assistant professor in the practice of ministry. Which is very exciting.
Exactly.
I still need to finish the dissertation, but I have a nice fancy title now. Hurrah!
Have a nice fancy title, and definitely proud of you, and I'm just excited for what you have going and the work you're doing. And then Wesley, Everest, and I definitely had a ball, just doing straight politics, like shoot it in my veins politics. I absolutely loved it.
It was great. Julia's shaking her head.
I know we have 2 more episodes. I was just emailing them last, already thinking through what we want to do. So it was awesome. Very excited that Everest could be on with us. And some of you may notice if you do watch us on YouTube. Last thing I'll say before we start getting to the meat of the, or I shouldn't say the meat, the protein of the episode, if you will. Normally, The protein.
Oh my god,
The protein.
the vegan,
The vegan
okay.
protein of the
I
episode.
can't.
I don't know. Not all our listeners may not know that Dr. Carter is like a strict vegan.
They know.
And a celebratory vegan.
Well, we have a lot of new listeners.
Yes,
New
both
listeners.
fair.
Yeah.
He's a vegan.
Yeah. Very proud. Not like one of those crazy vegans that are judgmental about it. I don't do any of that stuff.
No, but if you're
definitely-
eating shrimp in front of you, he will tell you it's disgusting.
Well,
And
because of the microplastics.
You
Because
made
it
fun
is.
of us for having turkey for your Thanksgiving, but only people you know.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, with shrimp again, microplastics. I'm like, there's all this stuff you can consume right now
I know,
will.
no, I don't want to
yeah.
talk. I know because
All right,
I know
all right.
because you told me. And I
Anyway,
already
before
did not
we get
think
to the
about it.
vegan protein of the episode,
I can't think about eating shrimp without thinking about Dr. Carter, but I still eat them because they are still delicious. I love ceviche.
Oh God, I am wearing a normally I wear a collared nice shirt in the podcast, but I'm wearing my Tottenham Hotspur shirt. For those of you who know anything about European football, we won the Europa League, and so I got my kit, my away kit on. I'm super excited, very thrilled. It was a big deal. I was watching it while I was supposed to be in a meeting. I was in a meeting. I was supposed to be paying attention to the meeting. I was watching television. And it was amazing, and I feel so great. I feel like I accomplished something, even though I did nothing other than be nervous and watch TV. So very excited for my Spurs. So come on, you Spurs! For all those who know, who are in the know. So the protein. Today's episode, we are discussing that. I kind of want to frame this episode around answering this question: why are you a Christian? Or one might say, why are you still a Christian? And I want each of us to take a few minutes to unpack our answer to that question. And the reason it came to me, I encountered this conversation on another podcast probably a couple of months ago. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting question. I wouldn't mind asking our guest that. But I didn't really necessarily know how it fit in with what we're doing. But then as we have moved onto YouTube, which, as I mentioned on this platform, that I wanted to be on YouTube because the more we continue to learn about YouTube and the role it's playing in kind of the manosphere and promoting a kind of conservative theological theopolitics, if you will, that I think is really undermining the true and profoundly transformative and compassionate aspects of Christianity. That you see this kind of Christian conservatism being promoted in there, that I think is actually doing harm. And so I wanted to, have more content on there to kind of act that. And there have been a few people who are leaving excellent and just kind comments or asking genuine questions, which has been amazing. But there have been some trolls, just some straight up, just trolls. And I guess I want to say I was surprised. I was surprised at just the genuine meanness. And I don't want to make this sound like liberal tears, because you're hurting my feelings. Because a part of me that wants to I can go back on you and make you look like an idiot, but that's not what I should do, right? Like I can do that.
I mean, sometimes.
Yeah, I'm opting not to, because the thing is, what I've also learned too is when you are, and we're going to get to this too with Trump, because he just did this with the president of South Africa. When you are it takes more energy to prove a insane argument wrong than to have the insane argument and just to keep saying the insane thing, right? It takes more energy. I have to sit here and think through, well, how can I make it so obvious that you're wrong that you have to accept that you're at least wrong, or perhaps may not have the entirety of the truth? It takes so much more energy. And so what surprised me, right, were the comments. It really made me question, why do they say they are Christian? Why are they claiming to be a Christian when they want to just type hateful comments, on our YouTube or on social media? Why do they need to feel as though they have to identify as a Christian at all if they want to be about creating a culture of hate? Do they honestly believe that their behavior is Christ-like? Do they genuinely believe they're practicing the kind of Christianity that Jesus talked about?
In short, yes, but as you were.
See, and I don't know that they do, and this is why I want to have this conversation, because what I want to posit and to come back to throughout this episode is I think they want to really redefine what a Christian is. They want Christian to be like Christendom. They want it to be like it was after Constantine, whereas like their idea of they want it to just be the normal quote unquote normalization of that religion, where it doesn't really mean anything, right? Where it's like it means white European middle class social values today, right? That's what they want it to mean. It doesn't mean going to church. I don't think for them being a Christian means reading the Bible. Honestly, I don't know if being a Christian has anything to do with Jesus, right? Like for these people, like it is just about power. It's about power to say you have to be like me, and my way of being in the world is okay, and I can my hate is actually okay because you're not conforming to my way of being in the world. And that's kind of what I felt like. That's the energy I feel like I'm getting from those comments.
I think that it actually is about adhering to a certain set of values. As if you believe all of these things and if you behave in these ways, and yes, meanness and cruelty is one of them. Yes, they've redefined Christian. I'm surprised you are just noticing this. This is what Wesley and I have been arguing about for months, years.
Decades at this point.
Well, I think I don't know that I would have. I don't let these people, at least as I encounter them, and probably because I'm not that engaged on social media, except for the last few years with this position at the church and the podcast. I didn't think these people would have identified as a Christian. I thought they just would have been like, whatever. Like, why? Again, I look,
Oh no. Oh
I'm
no.
like, see, this is why I feel like. So I grew up with a kind of, and this is Blair. I think I want to tie it into something you've said multiple times, right? While I'm not evangelical, I grew up in the kind of Christian culture in the 80s, especially in 90s, where it was like, if you said you were a Christian, you were supposed to like ask yourself, what would Jesus do? Like you actually like
I
changed
know
We
we
wore
wore those
bracelets.
bracelets.
I know. I'm like, you changed your behavior. I don't think Jesus would be on YouTube trolling folks. Like, I don't feel like Jesus would be doing that, right? And so that's still in my head. Like, that is deep in me that I'm supposed to be different, that I'm supposed to be not morally superior, but I'm supposed to strive to literally think about what is the most Christ-like response in this situation. And we were encouraged to do that as a way to counter culture, right? And so that's what, and that kind of, that's what I understood evangelical to be. And so Blair, like I said, that's what I thought of when I was thinking about what you have been said multiple times.
It's in that situation that is the key
Mm.
difference, because for folks who are falling into Christofascism, and you guys used that phrase last week, and I think we should use it more. Folks who are falling into Christofascism, their understanding of Christianity is a particular cultural expression of Christianity, and their growth in faith and intellectual development is stopped. It's an immature faith that does not understand that God's love is abundant and contextual, that God shows up in different spaces with people in their context. And so they didn't, we say like they redefine. I know I'm always cautious to use like a generic they, but this is not a new thing, right? Like the European white capture of Christianity that carried with it like an internal understanding of election and guaranteed salvation has been tied with white European colonial imperialist values for like hundreds of years. And so like we're the weird ones who are trying to like get back to pre-Constantinian, early church, contextual, variable expressions of following Christ.
I feel like for me, at least, that was the kind of Christianity we were supposed to have, that we were supposed to look at this pre-Constantinian view of the world as the ideal, as the early church, as the kind of ideal. And I think they have decided that it's easier to have the Constantinian Christianity. Like, I think that's what they've decided, that it's just flat out easier for them to do it. So, yeah. Blair?
It is easier, but I don't think that's an intentional decision. So I'm talking about, right, like faith development and intellectual development. There's this phenomenal scholar, James Fowler, who is deceased, but a psychology of religion scholar. who wrote about the stages of faith and aligned them sort of with Piaget's developmental theories. And folks that are captured by Christofascism or culturally dominant Christianity, like I said, are like in arrested development. They're in a phase where they are not actually asking questions or owning their faith for themselves. They have found within a community a sense of belonging in which they are told what to believe and they are shown how to behave, and they don't question that. And when they read the Bible, they usually read it alone in solitude, not in community. They're not questioned, right? It's quiet time. That's like the big evangelical thing, is you're supposed to get up and read your Bible for an hour every morning before you do anything else. Like that was drilled into me when I was in evangelical communities. And there's this like guilt if you don't do it. But reading the Bible together is secondary if you get to it at all. And so they're reading the Bible alone. They're listening to what the preacher says. They're being told to behave like their peers, and it's not considered a part of faith to doubt, to question, to push back. That's actually like, and what folks are told is that's an expression of a lack of faith, when in reality, James Fowler shows us that stage 4 of faith, and maybe sometime we should do a whole podcast on this, but like as you grow in faith, everyone has an experience of doubt, and that it is actually pushing through that doubt that allows you to reach like this existential maturity in faith. Yeah.
Well, and I think you talking about arrested development, another thing that we've talked about in the last few weeks in this pod is complex PTSD that is a result of abuse in many of these environments. And abuse is one of the things that causes arrested development in our emotional development when we're growing up, right? Like, so if you are abused, you are probably going to be trapped in wherever developmentally you are when that trauma happens. So it all goes together.
I also think, so there's a sort of like two things coming to mind with this. I think the first thing is, Dr. Carter, you're engaging with people on the internet. And the internet is, I like to say, it's a dumpster fire. And so like, I'm wondering if maybe this is just how the majority of people who are online, to whatever degree, like this is just how you operate online. It's short, mean things to say to strangers online. The world is hurting. The world's on fire. I can sort of, this is why I don't like dive into comments of articles or other like Instagram posts. It's just like, there's a lot there. A lot of not good there. But I think the other part is that like I remember being in small town conservative Christian Iowa and encountering some like really mean evangelical Christians who did go to church every single Sunday. Who the way that they spoke about people, I was like, where? I don't see Jesus' love. I don't see peace. I don't see reconciliation. I see bitterness. I see other things that are just like not appetizing, but it seems like it's fully who you are, and yet you continue to claim Christianity. But I wonder how much of that is simply the fact that the community that they exist in, most of them claim Christianity, and so it's just like a cultural artifact and not really any specific it's like we always have Christmas dinner at 2 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Like it's just, you always do it. It's how you grew up. You don't question it. You are who you are, terrible sometimes or awful in other times, but you're still going to cling to this sort of tradition because it is what you know. So that's sort of the things that I think about as a sort of, we're talking about how people engage online or how Christians continue to claim Christianity even though they model something completely different. But then the other question that I have is, all of these Christians are learning from their pastors this immature faith. And I know that evangelical churches don't have any specific rubric that qualifies someone to become a pastor. Mark Driscoll, looking at you. But it is something that like I don't understand for mainline denominations or for denominations that do have some sort of structure, like how this immature faith keeps being handed over and practiced from generation to generation when they go to seminary. They do, yeah. I think that's my confusion.
Julia?
Well, really quickly, I was going to say, the thing that has fascinated me is that I've observed not only do a lot of times these people behave in horrific ways and then say that they are Christian. If that doesn't, I mean, I guess that bothers me, but what really bothers me is I've witnessed people saying and doing the most horrifying things and then being, well, I say this because I'm a Christian. And this was a thing I've always been a Christian. I was a Christian, whatever. My story is my story. We'll get there. A few years ago, a person that I knew with whom I was friendly, who did not grow up in any church. She grew up with two artistic parents. They were not involved in anything. She is a white woman who is very, what do we say, Aryan? That's her aesthetic. And she decided that she was a
Aryan
Christian.
aesthetic.
I know. I'm like,
She is
okay,
very
well.
tall. She is blonde hair.
Maybe Scandinavian. I don't know. Can we say Aryan anymore?
I don't know. But you knew. But did you tell me it didn't elicit a picture? Because that's what I meant.
Absolutely.
It did.
That is what she's
worked.
very, very tall. She's pretty. She's pretty, but like she's pretty in that way that only they can be. That and I remember talking to her about religion. I was like, what? Like she was arguing with me about theology. And I'm like, girl, you ain't never stepped foot in a church until 6 months ago. Like, I need you to tell me what you think you're talking about. Like, I've been in this my whole life. And she goes, yeah, but you're not a real Christian. How do you figure? Well, Julia, if you were a real Christian, you wouldn't do this or you wouldn't do that. You would dress like this. You would say this. You would think this. And I'm like, what you're describing is actually just like whiteness, like straight, like it had nothing to do with any tenets of faith. It had nothing to do, the things she listed had nothing to do with Christianity. She was drawn to this religion because literally because she was a Nazi. And like that was the church that she was going to. That's what they were expressing as their Christian values. I'm not kidding. You're laughing. I'm telling you, this happened.
No,
I'm not.
we agree.
I agree.
appreciate you saying it like it is, as you
Yeah.
always do, Julia. Like,
Yeah.
there is no reason to pull punches. We're like coming Christo-fascist, white Christian, like they're Nazis. It's Nazi theology.
She was literally a Nazi, and that is what attracted her to the religion. And she thought I was not actually Christian because I wasn't a Nazi. Okay.
Blair?
True story.
Well, so this is making me think of there's a text that we had been hoping to have one of the authors on, and we still should try, The Religion of Whiteness, How Racism Distorts Christian Faith.
Yeah.
Michael O. Emerson and Glennie Bracey II. We haven't actually reached out yet, I think, but I don't know, Mike Emerson, if this makes it to you, we'd love to have you on the podcast. But there is like this is historic, this is long, this is not new, this is generations of Christianity being understood as whiteness. And that is, we've been fighting it a long time. And that's was one of the points I wanted to make to Wesley's question of like, what about these mainliners where the pastors go to seminary? And the challenging thing of being a mainline Protestant pastor is that overwhelmingly the mainline Protestant pastors who've gone to seminary are much more theologically progressive than their congregations. And we are not necessarily teaching pastors how to do culture change, how to do racial self-reflection, how to do spiritual growth and development that is aligned with intellectual growth and development. And even if we are teaching them how to do that, there are a whole lot of people in the pews who don't want anything to do with it. They want to show up on Sunday, be seen, say they belong to a church, and they don't show up for anything else. They don't want to do anything else. And then they yell at the pastor when they preach the gospel because they think it's political. Like, that is a huge challenge and like source of deep wounding for a lot of mainline Protestant pastors, because and it's why we have a very high, one of the reasons we have a very high burnout rate is that we have done the education, we have done the spiritual development, we have done the exploration and self-reflection, and we can't get our parishioners to do it with us. And that hurts, and it's hard.
Yeah, I think that ironically, one of the things that have made me a good pastor, as I would consider myself a good pastor, is having been a teacher for so long. I think that's a skill set that you need to learn in seminary. You need to learn like actual pedagogy, like because pedagogy is what I would argue allows you to create how to envision long term culture change because it's education. It's literally like how can I teach you some basics and over time continue to build upon that scaffolding. I want to get to a couple of the comments and then turn it into us thinking about answering the question that I said really framed this because again I was like why and how are these people Christian because I want to at least lift up a couple that I thought illustrated the point that I'm trying to make because um one of them just is ridiculous. Like one guy, he says, this is on our episode, how do you hold on to hope? So literally like I think a pretty positive episode. He's like, LOL, pathetic pandering. To be a progressive Christian is an oxymoron. God is never changing. And so then, I'm trying to be polite. I'm like, all right, we agree God is never changing. But I'm curious, what does that have to do with progressive Christianity being an oxymoron in your opinion? So then this person replies and says,
You had a reply. Okay.
"Oh no, they went.
Okay.
They went. Oh wait. They said, do you read the Bible or just pick a few scriptures to support your worldview of inclusion to any and all immorality? Because apparently that's what I do too. I'm super inclusive of all immorality." Uh, he further says, "I understand you people need to make money, so pandering to the left is a sound strategy. It's been done before, not original." And then he says,
We're
"You
not
deserve."
making money doing
I
it.
wish we were making money.
he says, "You deserve the amount of views you receive." So then he goes on to say, because he keeps going. I didn't say anything else to him. He keeps going. He says, "Nothing about being a follower of Christ is progressive. That is so blatantly obvious. Progress for the sake of progress is not progress. It's regress." Like that sentence that doesn't make any sense.
Those are
I-
just
Progress
toxic
for the
talking
sake of
points.
so look, he's
It sounds like the internet.
it's that. Well, see, there you go, Wesley. You're right. I can't even fathom a Christ follower making that argument. I'm a broken human. I am no better than you or anyone else, but I'm not going to act like I'm somehow better than other Christians by trying to accommodate immoral behavior into God's perfect world. Like again,
The
all this projection, all this projection.
Wow.
I'm
Ooh, baby,
like,
who hurt you?
I'm like, man. So then I was like, well, how are you defining progressive? I was like, look, I'm telling you, I was so
How are
proud of
you defining
myself.
immorality?
And so I didn't even I was like, how are you defining progressive? We appreciate the comments, even though we disagree. But if your goal is to be persuasive, you would do well to define your terms and ensure that the terms you are using to define people are in alignment with how they are defining themselves. Thanks again for taking the time to respond. We wish you peace and blessings. Because I literally was like, this dude needs some peace. He needs some peace. And then he responds, he says, at Progressive Christian, do you need the definition of progress? Your woke podcast is based on your own morals and not God's word. So let's start with you defining progressive Christianity. And I was just like, all right, I'm not going to respond to that because when you start your woke podcast, I'm like, all right. So this one actually, go ahead.
Why
Wesley.
is he even listening?
I don't know that. I don't think he is
Like,
listening.
He didn't
I
listen.
Okay,
think
great.
he just saw the title and he saw it on YouTube and he wanted to comment. I do not think he listened because obviously if he did, he would know what he's talking about or know that
You've
we
even
actually
read the Bible, sir.
You
Yeah,
didn't even listen to the
exactly.
podcast. Get out.
Yeah. And so then this other guy, Jared and Tasha. So because it's a picture of him and his partner. He asked the question, why hasn't a single denomination of socially liberalized Christianity survived across the millennium? And I was like, well, okay, this seems like an interesting thing. I was like, well, this is an interesting question. But two things need to be clarified. First, the concept of denomination could be traced back to the Great Schism of the 11th century. And then I go and describe some more of that. And that's the second, what do you mean by liberal? We define liberal as promoting social welfare, i.e., the poor, the sick, the widow, and the orphan. So we would argue that Jesus was, in fact, teaching a progressive vision of ancient Israelite religion. Right. And then essentially I go on to argue that there is no liberal denomination per se. Well, I say this is too early to fit your denomination question, but we would argue that the roots of Christianity are progressive. Moreover, there have been several progressive movements within the Western Church. From the radical love preached by St. Francis to the abolitionist theology of William Wilberforce, the workers' rights movement of Dorothy Day and Cesar Chavez, and the human rights movement started by Martin Luther King Jr. All of these people worked within denominations to help change and reform them. So to answer your question, there's no denomination of liberal Christianity because progressive Christians have worked within their religious communities, consistently trying to pull them towards love, justice, and compassion we see modeled in the ministry of Jesus Christ.
Look at you taking him to school.
Damn.
But again, I thought I took him to school in like a very nice, compassionate way. So then I almost said
It was a
something.
calling in, not a calling out. As we
How did it go
Loretta
for you?
Ross.
How did it work?
You were attacking.
How did it
him,
work?
Dr. Carter?
How did it work? How did Colin?
How dare you drag him through the coals?
So then I almost said a word I didn't want to say, so I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad y'all cut me off because he responds by saying not quite. And he talks about the first split of the churches in 325 with the disagreement on the Philolite clause, which is not true. Like this church did not split. The church was defining who it was. He talks about the Council of Chalcedon. Just again, doesn't know theology. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have a PhD in theology. I'm not going to say anything about this, so whatever. And then he says, so for the liberal Christianity question, I mean, socially liberal. It has never survived across time. I'm completely on board with you correcting the financial disease in today's evangelical Christianity, to clarify. And I didn't say anything about finances. So then I replied by saying, thank you for your thoughtful answer. I hope I answered your question about liberal Christianity as well. They're not liberal denominations per se. Rather, they have been socially progressive movements within denominations. And then he says, anything socially liberal is historically proven to be guaranteed to fail. That's my point. I agree with fighting against theological evils for sure, but we have to be careful when we put all of our theological eggs into the sexual preferences basket. The hierarchy of meaning becomes rearranged. The most fundamental disagreement is that God loves you for who you are. This is such a huge misunderstanding of the story of the Bible, ignoring transcendence. I didn't say anything about, I literally talked about workers' rights and enslavement. And he's like, you're obviously talking about sexuality. And then he says,
I don't think that sexuality even came up in that episode, which again, we know he did not listen to.
He did. And then, but then he says, most fundamental disagreement is that God loves you for who you are. I was like, wow, I'm literally not sure. I have no idea what you're reading. Like to walk away from any kind of Christianity to think God does not love you for who you are. I honestly do not know.
I mean, I understand it. It's like this understanding that like God loves you for who you are, but God does not leave you where you are. That is like absolutely a fundamental belief I hold. So like he's like really leaning into this like suffering, redemptive suffering. You have to be like transformed. But it's not generally transformed in the image of Christ. It's transformed in the image of the white preacher that you follow. And yeah, I have mostly, when I have these interactions with trolls, internet trolls around theology, it tends to be Christofascist Catholics and also Christofascist Eastern Orthodox men, which is a whole other political, ethnic thing that we could unpack. But yeah, done, Dr. Carter.
Yeah, I just to me,
the patience.
Thank you. I felt, especially, I thought the guy was and again, that's examples. There are others. I was like, these are the ones that I think are most illustrative of the comments that I get. And I think, to me, this fits broadly within what we see happening in our current politics right now about who gets to belong, right, to America, right? Who gets to belong? And you see this in the birthright citizenship argument. You see this in the South African refugees, right? Whereas clearly, with birthright citizenship, they are trying to determine and they're trying to have a tight rein on who, quote unquote, gets to be an American. And I know, Wesley, you've been really paying attention to that, and probably a little bit, more so than all of us. I think you had even mentioned in your text, like, that is something that's obviously important to you for personal reasons.
Yeah, before I get to the birthright citizenship, what this interaction sort of highlighted for me was something that I was thinking about in preparation for this, is that claiming Christianity gives evangelical white Christians like a claim to victimhood. And
we have talked about this before.
And so that, I wonder if that, because white Christians are dominant culture, they have so much power in this country, this is one way that they can feel aggrieved by society or attacked by society or attacked by other Christians. And so I wonder, I don't know if I'm not going to say that it's conscious, but I feel like it gives them that like ability to feel marginalized when they are the ones marginalizing others. Julia, I saw your hand go up. I don't know if you.
Well, that's Kathleen. We brought this up a couple of weeks ago because Kathleen Rogers she's mentioned this to me. She was like, because Christ came for the marginalized, it is impossible to. It doesn't. I imagine it doesn't feel good to recognize you are
the oppressor.
And so much of their culture is about finding ways to become the victim because otherwise they literally can't be Christian. They can't. It doesn't work.
And it was in the language that he was using. It's like broken. It's like, oh, you're like, again, you're like positing yourself as a victim, where you at the same time as you're like spewing hate in another direction.
Yeah, no, I think just to quote Jason Stanley's How Fascism Works Again, he writes, promulgating a mythical hierarchical past, which is exactly what that guy did, right? Promulgating a mythical hierarchical past works to create unreasonable expectations. When these expectations are not met, it feels like victimhood. And I think this is to your point, right? I mean, it's where they feel like victims.
Wait, what were you reading just now?
Jason Stanley's How Fascism Works, the politics of us and them. I absolutely, oh my gosh, this is like my new Bible, basically.
Now don't let them hear you say that.
I know. I'm definitely going to help. I'm definitely going to help based on that guy's framework of theology. But Wesley, I did want to talk about birthright because I think what they're trying to do is to create these strict barriers around what they believe Christianity is and who gets to be in, who gets to be out. And it's much more about, again, normative cultural values, as Julia said, and as Blair articulated, a kind of theology that allows them to ease into the community rather than actually have to grow and change and mature.
Yeah. I did it wasn't painful. I really enjoyed it. Listening to the entire 2-hour Supreme Court.
It was funny. Reading some of the transcript, I was like, even the conservative justices were like, what are you talking about? Sorry, go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
Absolutely. So, I mean,
okay, wait, summarize it for us, for those of us who are not
okay.
paying close enough attention. Give us the intro and then tell us your opinion, Wesley.
So the Trump administration, released an executive order wanting to aim birthright citizenship. And so that quickly got blocked by federal district judges, a handful of them, and led to a nationwide injunction so that they couldn't implement that executive order while it was being, debated or waiting on for a decision. Yeah. But it wasn't the Trump administration did not bring the question of is birthright citizenship constitutional? That's not the question they brought to the Supreme Court. The question they brought was, should federal district judges have the power to issue nationwide injunctions? So because they keep losing the question of, is it constitutional? Like left and right, they talked about it so many times during that conversation that they just keep losing that argument. Courts in any place keep saying, no, this is constitutional, what you're doing is bad. And so the question that they brought was this injunction, because again, the Constitution is clear that all persons in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, and so birthright citizenship applies to everybody, regardless of status. And so the reason they want to get rid of this nationwide injunction is because they could continue losing at local courts, and they would still be able to deny people birthright citizenship because they're arguing that everyone needs to be able to bring forth a suit individually in order to get that right back. And so this raises a lot of questions about how it works between states. Like some states may be more liberal with the understanding, other states. And so how does it work between if you're moving from one state where you weren't a citizen because of that state and you move into a state that does give you citizenship as a result of that? Which is kind of like, as I was listening, I was like, I hate it because the lawyers, I guess, I don't know, some of the lawyers may be dumb, but like this lawyer, at least the strategy behind it, we're not going to tackle the question of birthright citizenship. We're going to tackle the method by which courts can stop harm nationwide. And so if they are able to succeed, it means that it would mean that anything that the Trump administration or any future administration does requires individual redress, and only the people who bring forward that suit would be subject to the decision. So I could, bring a suit against the federal government, and if I win, great, I get to keep my citizenship. But the person next to me, they don't benefit from that decision because it's only the person bringing it forward. And so the argument from the Trump administration, was that the way that our system is designed is to allow these sort of like individual cases to bubble up or to go through a class action lawsuit. But even then, the Trump administration noted that they would challenge class actionability in these types of suits. And so at every point, and that's what was so interesting. They had Amy Coney Barrett sort of pushing them hard as to like the Trump administration's lawyer didn't answer Justice Elena Kagan's question, and then Amy Coney Barrett jumped in and sort of defended is maybe a strong word, but really sort of had her back a little bit because it does
defended.
Yeah,
she kind of did defend her
because it does put into question like the court's ability to do anything if every decision has to, like every million of people, the millions of babies that are born every single year have to bring individual cases in order to get redress. So yes, it was around birthright citizenship, but it was really more about like procedure. And the Trump administration would prefer that individuals bring forward cases because it lets them continue denying birthright citizenship to people and only having to give it to those individuals who have a lawyer, who have the money to be able to bring forward these suits. So there wouldn't be a way for wide relief. And so they could technically just keep doing it, and only the small amount of people who could sue would be able to get their citizenship.
But aren't they also simultaneously arguing that not everyone should have court cases? I know it's a different thing, but when they're just picking people up off the street and like,
oh yeah, that's fair.
aren't they also simultaneously saying like, we can't just give everyone a court case? That's ridiculous. We can't just give everyone due process. That's insane. So like, I'm confused. Well, no, I'm not. To be clear, I'm not.
About resources. Yeah, it's about resources and identity and belonging. So it's like if you have the communal belonging within the U.S. to prove that you're a citizen and that you should have birthright citizenship, then you'll get the court case. And in the same way, if you are a good enough, quote unquote, I'm doing big air quotes in case you're not watching YouTube, like if you're a good enough citizen, you'll have the support you need to rally your community to get a court case. So they are actually making it about belonging, or they're trying to say it's about belonging, but it's not. It's about money.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is why, I mean, Wesley, to your point, and Julie, that was an excellent point in terms of tying full circle with the, arguments around due process. They're like, well, these people don't deserve due process, but these people we're going to guarantee they have some kind of due process when really they're not. I mean, because that's put such a burden. I mean, as Blair can relate to, like when you go to the hospital to have a child, like this means you got to get your passport, your birth certificate, then you got to go. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right? It would be insane because there's actually other things that take precedence than getting some documents before you go to the hospital, right? But I absolutely loved Wesley, before I transition to talk about the refugees, was Justice, I think it was Sotomayor. I heard the exchange where she had with him about, she like tried to like translate this into like MAGA politics. Like she was like, say for instance, another president comes in and this president decides there's too much gun violence, and say they issue an executive order to take everybody's guns. So what you're saying is that it would be okay for this person, for all the military to come in and take everybody's guns. And I'm like, this is exactly what you need to, that's how you have to talk to these people.
That's
I'm
so
like,
good.
It's so good. Cause I'm like, and so this is the thing that is tricky. This is a problem where there is no solution that's perfect. I agree. There have been, like with respect to the Biden administration, they were like, that's why we didn't get student debt relief, right? Because they went and they found the right kind of court to issue a nationwide injunction. That's why farmers, didn't get some of the relief, the Black farmers especially, that they were due to get because of nationwide injunctions. Like, these things can be weaponized for political purposes. There is not a way to solve it within our current system. It's better to have the opportunity for it to stop than to not have it. And it sucks when it doesn't work to your benefit, but that's the way that, like, unless we change to a parliamentary system, then then this is what it is, right? And so this is where it frustrates me, and I think, again, it's about creating barriers. And I want to briefly about the Afrikaners. This
Again, give us context, Dr. Carter. Before you give us your opinion, give us the context.
like, I have to get the, because I'm like, it was so insane. So I should also say I am going to South Africa in like a few weeks, teaching a class there on environmental justice and race and reparations, and so I have a bit of a decent amount of knowledge around the issues that they're discussing about farmers and land reform and land access. And so there's this since 2018, wealthy, because the Afrikaners are these white descendants of settler colonists from the
Dutch.
Netherlands.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some English, but mostly Dutch. Who basically, they, because of apartheid, they have many of them have a large amounts of land that they actually aren't necessarily using. It's either laying fallow or they're underusing it because they want to hold on to the land, eventually be able to sell it to make a profit. And South Africa passed a law this year saying that the government could seize the land even if the person wasn't selling it, and not even have to compensate them for it if they found they had a reason to do so. They have not used this law. Ideally, they say all outlined they want to pay people for this land. They're having a land issue. I should say that, similar to what we're having here in terms of having space built housing. As a consequence of all this stuff happening politically, and the consequence of South Africa actually having a high murder rate, people have been arguing, white wealthy people, some white wealthy people have been arguing that there's a genocide taking place around Africa, the white South Africans. There's no evidence of a genocide. All the data says it's like barely any of all the murders that happen in the country. Very few are white people, and even obviously a smaller amount are the farmers. And yet, and still, it's this myth making that's being promoted to justify the fast tracking that Donald Trump did to allow South African refugees into the country, white South African refugees, to go into places like Minnesota and Idaho and other places they're sending them, because they believe they're a cultural fit, whereas they're not. They are denying people who are Venezuelan, who are escaping persecution because of their gender and sexuality, people who are Afghani, like literally people who served our country, right? Like, denying them the capacity to be here as a refugee. Like, it's so obvious that they're saying these people can be here because they're white, and their imagined suffering matters more than the actual suffering of brown people who may or may not be Christian. And it goes back to, in my mind, this idea of community, this idea of, they want to put guardrails around who gets to count, who gets to be seen as a full person, who gets to be seen within this framework of understanding of our social norms, which they're defining as Christian social norms. Which, I mean, there's a part of me that struggles because I don't want to call these people Christian. Like, I genuinely don't want to. Even and I, at the same time, I wouldn't want them to do that to me, and so I'm choosing not to do that. But my instincts are that you should not call yourself a Christian if you're not trying to be Christ-like. Just full stop. And so it frustrates me that I have to. And again, I know we're going to get to the actually answering the question about why we are a Christian. It frustrates me that I got to share this word with these people as a descriptor, but I don't think it actually reflects who they want to be. Blair?
Yeah. Before we move on to the boundaries of Christianity, right? What is Christian? What is not? I just want to add a little bit more context too to this question of white South Africans, and very clearly state that white fragility and white discomfort is not violence. It's not. It's growth. Welcome. If you're a white person who feels a little uncomfortable for being white, congratulations. You're learning about your racial identity. Welcome. But there was a historical fear in South Africa that was based on a handful of murders that did happen to white farmers over land disputes in the 1990s. But this was turned into like an excised myth that white farmers were constantly at risk. And Johnny Steinberg, who's a political scientist, has done some great work around this. He did some ethnographic studies in the 1990s. He has a great book called Midlands, A Very South African Murder, that like looks at one of these murders and then extrapolates how it became this like huge myth of violence. There has been violence against white South Africans. It's true. There is not a genocide, right? There's like a very specific political language around systematized killing, systematized disenfranchisement, restriction for reproductive rights, restriction of movement. Like there is a convention that the UN has created to define what genocide is, and a few acts of violence, and it was truly a handful of acts of violence that were racialized towards white people is not the same thing as a genocide. And so it's just another moment. It's another evidence of what the fascist playbook is, which is to create myths based on small facts and then utilize them as political propaganda to get your way. And so this is not to say like there is still racial tension in South Africa. There are still problems around, these white Afrikaners have been here. They have been here for generations. Like they own the land regardless of how they acquired the land, like there is a tension there of do they belong? And I don't get to decide that. It's like South Africans have to decide that together. But for our government to place this word genocide upon something that is like an internal cultural struggle and not be able to apply it to our own context where we very much actually had genocide against our native people here in the United States. It is a tool. It is a weapon of control.
100%.
So, yeah, it's a dog whistle.
100% dog whistle. I mean, it's like the fact you can
not even a dog. It's a foghorn, man.
It's a fog or just it's a bullhorn. It is frustrating to not want to claim not take accountability for the genocide of various indigenous communities in America, to not want to call what's happening in Palestine a genocide when it's obviously a genocide. And I think that it is, well, not even just, I mean, it fits the definition. All the international human rights people are calling it this. Like these are obvious cases. And so again, it goes to why these terms are getting used, how they get used, how they get weaponized in order to create communities. If I redefine what the genocide is, then I can say, well, then I can create the past that justifies this future truth that I want to exist. Similarly, with the people I was engaging with on YouTube, like it's literally about, I'm going to imagine what Christianity is, and that's what it actually is, rather than actually looking at the tools and resources and history books that we have that tell us actually what it is. And so I know Julie has something to say, then I want to turn over to Blair if we can actually start answering the question around that I framed the podcast.
I was just going to say, and this is why, mark my words, Kellyanne Conway's coining of the term alternative facts, this is why we are where we are. That for the past decade, there's been a group of people who have been saying, these are now facts. Oh yeah, you think racism, you think slavery happened? Well, I say it didn't. And now we have to, because we're fair and balanced, we have to treat both truths as though they're equally true. And now here we are. Nobody knows which way is up. Nobody knows which way is down. We don't know. No one knows it. No, there's no reality. We can't agree on reality because we done let these people convince half of the world that they can make up their own facts. Look at us. Look at us.
Yeah.
That raggedy lady. I can't.
I mean, the thing is, she's not the first by any stretch. I mean, every time Christofascism has arisen, it's been through a myth making of history. She coined that term, which I think actually describes what is happening. And I think that we have fallen victim, as I said, to trying to disprove arguments that are so ignorant, so illogical. They cannot be disproven. It takes all this energy where I've said, I'm just like, you saw what I did. I'm like, tell me your terms. I'm going to make you do the work. I'm not arguing with you, man, over like, because clearly you don't understand what progress means. You don't understand what liberal means. I'm going to make you define it. And then you're going to get frustrated and call me woke because I'm like, your woke podcast can't define. I'm like, actually, I asked you to define it, dude. So obviously you can't define it. So, but now let us turn to the why we are deciding to either keep or not keep this term, right? Because that's what came up for me as I was engaging, and I think a lot of our listeners, from what I gather in the emails, are grew up with the kind of Christianity that we all talked about, wearing the bracelets, thinking that we're actually should be a certain kind of way in the world. So Blair, why are you
Toot or
still a
boot?
Christian?
Toot or boot?
Toot or boot?
Toot or boot? Christianity. Toot or boot?
Well, and I think underlying all of this, the political conversation that we're wrapping into this question of what is Christian, what is not, that it's coming back to how do we define Christianity? And when we define something, we are placing boundaries, right? And I would say, as a scholar of evangelism, this is one of the questions that I work on, and this is the area I describe it as incorporation. How do we understand when a person moves from being beyond Christianity to within Christianity? And I think for a long time, we, as the institutionalized church within Christian cultural, political, Christo-fascist realities, we have made the boundary of outsider and insider really strong. And too often we have created cultural barriers to what is and is not Christian, instead of asking, what is Christ-like within someone, that and how do and when do they understand themselves to be part of the community of Christ followers? And so, you guys know I love Letty Russell. I talk about her all the time, but also Catherine Tanner, who's another theologian, feminist theologian, in her book, Theories of Culture, talks about it's really important that we don't, even as progressive Christians, we don't say that's not Christian. Because if someone understands themselves to be Christian, if they understand themselves to be a follower of Christ, then we are in the conversation together. So Letty Russell talks about, instead of talking about the boundaries of Christianity and the boundaries of the church, we need to be focused on what is the center. The center is Christ. And Catherine Tanner's kind of saying the same thing. If you understand yourself to be in a conversation about who is Jesus and what does that mean for me, then you are part of Christianity and we are in this together. And so that is a shift from boundedness to like pursuit, like communal pursuit, that we are on our way towards something together and we're all in different places. But I'm not going to look at you and say, well, your place is a little too far, so you're not actually Christian. Like, as uncomfortable as it makes me, as deeply wounded as I am, to know that when I say I'm a Christian, that means I am also in community with Christo-fascists, because of my understanding that the center is the key, not the boundary, I have to hold to that discomfort and understand that it's my responsibility to be in conversation. And I will say, me, this is my story in my white body with my white privilege, but to say that, like, it is my responsibility to be in community and conversation with anyone who understands themselves to be Christian, because we are in pursuit of Christ. And so that's like my little 2 cents about, like, as a scholar, this how do we define Christian and non-Christian? And I just genuinely think defining what's not, I think it's okay to say something is not Christ-like. I think that's incredibly helpful. I think that's a really important distinction to make. But to say something is not Christian when the person doing it understands themselves to be Christian, that's actually creating boundaries that aren't helpful. So the question you were asking us to answer, Dr. Carter, is, why are we still Christian? And I would say that I am still Christian because I have learned about the significance and the meaning of the story of Christ, that God would go from being separate from us to one of us, to die and to suffer and to redeem Christianity such that we also would have the opportunity to know and to experience that the worst moments of our lives are not the end and the worst mistakes we make can be redeemed. The concept of forgiveness that offers us, I have not found that same concept in other religions of the world expressed in a way that is as strong as it is expressed in the story of Christ, the story of forgiveness and of redemption. And there are lots of other reasons, but that is for me what I always come back to, that this key message of grace and of forgiveness that is part of the Christ event just does not seem to be matched with its intensity in other world religions. And I will add that it is queer Christians and Black Christians and feminist Christians that have most strongly taught me that. And that those traditions is what has allowed me to come back from the edges of brokenness and trauma related to Christo-fascist white Christianity and to reclaim the identity of Christian for myself.
I mean, Blair, even in the way you answer that question shows how the thinking around the pursuit of the center, right, of Jesus. Literally, like what your answer is like, what does it mean in finding communities who have best helped you articulate and internalize um, what it means to align yourself with this way of being in the world that is Christ-like. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And I know Wesley, I'm curious how you want to answer this question, because I know we've had personal conversations around this, and I know it's and maybe even talked about the podcast early on. I can't remember, but I'm curious, how you want to identify yourself.
Yeah, no, we have. I think we had a different title for the podcast at that point, but so maybe they won't find it.
Exactly.
But it's there. It's out on the internet. Yeah, I mean, I think for me the hardest part is claiming the word Christian. I think a long time ago I stopped claiming it because of all of the terrible things that you have to sort of like immediately articulate that you aren't. You aren't racist. You aren't homophobic. You aren't anti-poor. You all these things that come up immediately whenever anyone learns that you go to church. And I see this even in um, progressive spaces around progressive people that you'll like when our friend Jonathan introduces us as church friends. I always, especially if it's being introduced to like other queer people, I see the reaction. So like there is no negating the negative impression that people have of Christianity. And so for those reasons, I don't expend energy on trying to claim it and fight for it. There are other places where I divert my energies. But the reason I continue participating as part of the loft, as part of these Christian communities, is the spaces that I am right now. They center community, they center healing, they center decolonization, they center care. And so the loft, Westwood, UMC, they're places where these things are happening intentionally. And so I find that encouraging, I find that beautiful, and it's something that I want to participate in. And so I'm sort of like, in the same way that I can't, and I think I've said this before, in the same way that I can't jettison like my Latinx upbringing, all the things that made me who I am, I also can't jettison Christianity, because some of my earliest memories are of going to church. And just the storied and the community that was, I mean, yes, it was a conservative community, but it was still, my second family in San Diego was the pastor and his wife and their kids growing up. And so all of this informs who I am. The Beatitudes inform sort of my perspective on advocacy towards the marginalized or for the marginalized. And so it's there, in the same way that like I'll never stop liking tacos because they're delicious. Uh, but I don't necessarily need to claim Christianity and advocate for it in the same way that others might. But I think it still lingers, it's still present, it still informs. It's just not. I don't walk around with the term Christian, and I don't defend it when maybe it needs to be defended. I don't know if it ever actually does, but whatever. So that's sort of like how I engage with the question of like, why am I still a Christian? It's like, well, I don't claim it, but there's a lot there that I still find value in, and that still informs how I move through the world. And as long as the spaces that I'm engaged with in Christianity are places where that is happening, then I'm cool with it.
Wesley, that's beautiful. Two things. First, I got totally sidetracked when you said taco because I was like, "Oh wow, that sounds good." I'm kind of hungry. I'm not gonna lie. Secondly, though, I mean, you are such a community like oriented person. Like that was like if I were to guess what you were to say, it would have been something along the lines of that. And you articulated in a bit more depth than I think you have in the past around how and why that is important for you. Not only in terms of your upbringing and background, who you understand yourself to be as a human, but also the role and importance of family, right? And found family as a part of that. And that's just I think that's a huge part of what it means to be a person of faith or to be a part of a faith community, right? And that's going to really tie into the episode that we are planning that I will leave as a surprise for our listeners around community. Julia, I'm curious, how will you answer this question? Why are you still a Christian?
I'm so glad I'm going third. So it's so many, I have so many reasons. Some of them have been shared already by my friends. I genuinely and sincerely, like truly believe that Jesus Christ was a real person and that he was a liberator and that he started the social movement that was so profound, like the social movement based in love and community that was so profound that here we are 2,000 years later still talking about it. I genuinely and sincerely believe that. And I believe, I believe that prophets come in many forms and have and always do, and that we all have access to that kind of like divinity, but that for whatever reason, certain people just make a more lasting impression than others. And he was one of them. And so I believe in his teachings. I genuinely and sincerely do. I know I might not always act like it. Okay. I'm not perfect. I'm not him, but I'm saying, I believe that I should be. And similar to what Wesley said, I also recognize that I grew up in this tradition. And so that irrespective of what I call myself or what I don't call myself, I can't remove the lens of these beliefs that will always like be there. It will, even if I say that I'm no longer a Christian, it will all go through this filter of these things that were instilled in me at such a young age. And so I'm very aware of that. And then for me, I will also add, I think a lot about ancestors and history and tradition and birthright. And this is a faith that started in Africa and that was brought here with enslaved people. And I hate the idea of just letting it be just handing it over to the oppressors, by handing the moniker over just because they have more power. And so people believe what they say more. I really think that does not honor my ancestors, my lineage, and the faith that I follow. So those are my main reasons, I think.
No, I absolutely love that. I think that, I mean, obviously the last point hits deep because I believe that it has been a co-opting, right, of a tradition that comes out of, North Africa, Middle East, and it has been weaponized and used to do so much harm. And the hijacking of it is just beyond frustrating. But I especially appreciate, Julia, the way you talk about this belief, this depth of belief in the truth of Jesus, right? And what this actually means as someone so deeply connected that they're able to create this movement to transform communities. And I think that, having those kinds of experiences and understanding that truth as what grounds a lot of people. It will ground so many of us in the reason why we decide or to stay Christian or still claim Christianity. I know for me, I am still a Christian because of my experiences of God, like my own personal experiences of something that is deeply transcendent, that continues to inspire and shape and move me to engage the world in ways that I didn't realize was possible. And the pathway through which I have understood and learned how to best be in relationship with that divine is the spiritual path of Jesus. It is the spiritual path of radical compassion. It is this way of being in the world that understands itself both as of a mystic, of a radical social justice oriented mystic that understands and believes that the lines there are not fixed lines between ourselves and the sacred, that these lines at best are blurry, and that in those moments when we feel most deeply connected to ourselves, we also feel most deeply connected to God. And it is, for me, trying to be Christ-like and trying to live that way, and trying to ask myself ask myself what Jesus would do and grow towards becoming that, moving towards that center. Like you said, Blair, like I was like, that's it. Like, that is it. Like that is the telos. That is the goal. That's why I'm still a Christian, because I truly believe it is to help create the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. Like, it truly is. Like, it is. I want us to live in the beloved community. I fundamentally believe that the kingdom of God is at hand, and that we are called to bring that to life, like to allow that spirit to come alive. And this path for me is the path that has best allowed me to pursue that end. And so I find resonance in all of your comments, in that I've decided to continue to claim it, despite the as Wesley would call it, the reality of the internet. So when you said that, I was like, well, I'm old, so my use of the internet is like actually for like work. I'm like I'm I'm like, I said emails, I'm like, that's what I use it for. Well, I want to thank you all for answering this question that I know is not the easiest question to answer. It requires us to be vulnerable, but I think it's helpful for our listeners also to understand why we do this work. And also, really, we still want to encourage you all to email us any questions that you have. I loved having the question last week. I thought that was really actually fascinating, and maybe I never thought I would actually be so engaged talking about the devil. But I was like, oh wow, this is interesting. So, any other questions, we would love to have them, to be able to engage them. I want to thank you all for joining us for the Progressive Christian Podcast. The Progressive Christians Podcast is a ministry of The Loft, a worship community of Westwood United Methodist Church. If you would like to connect with us and be a part of the conversation, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at The Progressive Christians. Please subscribe to our YouTube. You don't have to defend us on, through the comments, but if you
definitely don't do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want to clap back,
get in there.
I don't have to.
If that is the calling that God has placed upon your heart, please do so, but do so with kindness.
Yeah, just save me the stress rather than figure out how to be nice to these people. We are grateful, so very grateful that our show is mixed and edited by our wonderful audio engineer, Ajik. Again, I want to invite you to rate, review, share, and subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you're using. And we'll see y'all next time. Thanks. Bye.
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 Bye.